How effective is affordance and visual clues in the design of video games to influence and engage a user's experience? What is affordance? Affordance is the idea of showing not telling, teaching without words, essentially allowing common sense and simple reasoning to teach the player how to use the mechanics of the game. Games that do this well are fantastic, they don't need wikis or tutorials. Affordance is based on someone's expectations, real life versus video game expectations. Good affordance relies on someone's real-world expectations, such as flammable objects burning in fire. Bad affordance relies on the expectation that the player has a knowledge on video game conventions. Breath of the Wild has many ways to solve the same problem. It makes players feel like geniuses for overcoming basic obstacles, and that is extremely empowering. They are able to apply their real-world knowledge. Visual clues are something that show the player what to do. Typically, they're not telling the player what to do, rather suggesting that something is possible, or giving a piece of information. In Uncharted 2, all climbable objects are yellow, so the player subconsciously goes to yellow objects when they want to climb something. This series has been split into 5 key ideas on how a game can be enhanced with good affordance and visual clues. It can influence a player's action and engage them. The 5 key points are simple GUI, game mode information, distinctive colours, charm and clarity, and visualize button inputs. See you on the first video. How effective is affordance and visual clues in the design of video games to influence and engage a user's experience? Simple GUI. Graphics rather than text improves affordance. But what does this mean? Well, visualizing a piece of information rather than lengthy text, videos and animations instead of instructions, and graphics rather than words. What's an example of this? Into the Breach uses short animations to visually show how a troop attacks and the flow and effect that attack might cause. This could be described in a lengthy paragraph, but players don't read. You could type it out 100 times. Damage a tile pushes adjacent tiles, but showing that little animation of them moving is 1,000 times more effective, says Justin Marr, designer of Into the Breach. The more intuitive your design, the less text it will need, as Karen Types from Duolingo puts it. A more subtle example is in Super Mario Odyssey. Whenever a character is mentioned by name, an emoji of that character is shown alongside. This means you can instantly visualize the character without having to remember its name. This could be applied as simply as changing text buttons to be icons, such as a floppy disk to save, or a Google Maps icon for location. Players don't read. But a trap with graphics is they aren't universally recognized, so don't assume your audience has played other games. Try to rely on real-world and popular applications. Ask yourself, is there any text which is redundant? Can a paragraph be replaced with something that's easier to digest? Players don't read, so by removing text you can streamline the game and make it more easier for a player to engage. See you in the next video. How effective is affordance and visual clues in the design of video games to influence and engage a user's experience? Game world information. Information displayed in the game world rather than HUD or a GUI or numbers improves affordance. Instead of showing a number or a piece of information on the GUI or HUD, blending into the game world can decrease cognitive overload and reduce visual clutter. Ring Fit Adventure is an RPG where you have to physically exercise and run to progress. The game signals you're doing an action correctly in a few ways. The controller rumbles, the primary muscle of the action glows golden on the avatar, and the avatar's hair becomes fiery. Another example of this is in Stack. The number of hits you can take before you die is determined by the number of blobs in the stack. And to gain more lives, you have to collect more blob buddies. Take inspiration from the real world. Metroid Dread signals it is now safe as you enter a room full of peaceful butterflies. A more subtle example is in Plants vs Zombies. The game doesn't need to tell the player that zombies with metal buckets for hats are more resistant than ones with traffic cones. Intuitively, this makes sense based on the hat's physical real-world properties. The player knows a plant is watered in Stardew Valley because the soil is dark and damp, and you might say, that's obvious, but that's exactly the point. The game could have given a prompt of text to show the crop is watered, but rather it uses real-world expectations, where soil becomes dark when wet. Ask yourself, is it crucial for the player to know the exact value of a piece of information? Does it need to be displayed in number or word form? During the development of Reigns, the game would tell the player the exact change a decision would make using numbers. But this made players focus on numbers rather than the story. By removing the player's ability to see exact changes, the player's decision became more instinctual and based on what they think would happen. This influenced the user's experience. See you in the next video. How effective is affordance and visual clues in the design of video games to influence and engage a user's experience? Distinctive colours. Distinctive and unique colours improves visual clarity. By using different colours for different actions, concepts or ideas, the player can associate that colour with that action, concept or idea. By making a character dark red, a player can assume that character is evil. In the paint user game Splatoon, the teams have distinctive bright contrasting colours: blue and red, green and pink, purple and yellow. Because it's crucial for the player to know what colour ink is around them, the colours are made distinctive. In the traffic management game Mini Motorways, a coloured house has the same coloured car which goes to the same coloured supermarket. It's then a process of managing the best routes for these coloured cars to take to their destinations. The game could have had different types of stores instead of colours, but these colours quickly indicate what's trying to go where. A more subtle example is in Uncharted 2, where climbable objects are yellow. This is a subtle colour choice, but when a game is hyper-realistic, distinguishing against what is climbable and what is not, in a world where anything could be climbable, is important. In Alto's adventure, not only is a completed objective crossed out and ticked, to signify finished and completion, but by also fading it out, a player's attention is naturally drawn to the objectives that are still contrasting against the background. The main cast of characters in the Super Mario series all have different primary colours: Mario red, Luigi green, Princess Peach pink, etc. This could be applied by giving an idea, concept, or action a unique colour so a player can quickly distinguish between it. Ask yourself, is there a reason it has to be this colour, or can it be a brighter, more distinctive colour for clarity? How effective is affordance and visual clues in the design of video games to influence and engage a user's experience? Charm versus clarity. Although characterization decreases affordance, it is important for a game's charm and distinctiveness. A game can feel unique when it doesn't follow the conventions of other games. As Sakurai puts it, clarity and style are arguably contradictory ideas. Often in the pursuit of affordance, a game's visual style can be lost as it's being modelled after other games or real-life things. Persona 5 has the most distinctive and unique menu style ever. Anyone that thinks UI has to be boring has obviously never played Persona 5, says Mark Brown from GameMaker's Toolkit. But this does come with the side effect of a harder to navigate menu, reducing affordance and visual clarity. Another example of this is in Splatoon 3, which leans hard into its punk rock aesthetic, which looks really cool, but again, difficult to figure out what's going on. A more subtle example is when some games offer font changes, from the game's default font to a more readable one. Another part to consider is the diction used. Inclusive language can encourage players to choose options and not feel like the game is making fun of them. Safe mode or worst mode can feel demeaning. Instead, Super Mario Odyssey and Celeste have assist modes, which serve as a tool if you need it. Mark Brown says that changing the formatting can increase inclusiveness. Ask yourself, is it easy to understand or navigate? And if not, how can it be simplified or changed? Is there any text that could negatively affect the player's experience? And if so, is it really needed? How effective is affordance and visual clues in the design of video games to influence and engage a user's experience? Visualize button inputs. Visualizing possible use inputs such as buttons or swipes improves affordance. Karen Tai from Duolingo refers to the utterly screwed test. If a person is dropped randomly at any point in the game, can they understand what's going on? This might sound extreme, but if someone hasn't played the game for months, they might have forgotten the objective or the controls. But more simply, it's to show the player what actions they are able to perform. In The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, all actions are visualized not only with the button, but the location of the button. This means if you're unfamiliar with a controller, you don't have to look down constantly. A novice has to both remember how to play a game and how to use a controller, which creates two barriers. A well-designed game makes the controller barrier as small as possible. In both Super Mario Odyssey and Ring Fit Adventure, the game will display short videos in the corner of the screen for new actions that might be unfamiliar to the player. A more subtle example is in Pokemon Legends Arceus. The button input is next to an icon describing what the button is for. This is displayed at all times so the player knows their options. A lot of Nintendo Switch games have to be compatible with a pair of Joy-Cons, a single Joy-Con, and a Pro Controller. Therefore, it's crucial for a Nintendo Switch game to show easy to understand button prompts that are universal across the 3 controller combinations. This could be applied by giving a simple button prompt when an object can be interacted with. And if the player has a lot of possible actions, it can be good to visually show what each button does using GUI, as in Breath of the Wild or Pokemon Legends Arceus. Ask yourself, could a player be confused by how to play, and if they didn't play the game for a month, would they still figure out how to progress? How effective is affordance and visual clues in the design of video games to influence and engage a user's experience? Affordance and visual clues. Affordance and visual clues are an effective way to engage and influence a user's experience. From simple GUI to displaying information in the game world, using distinctive colours and visualising button inputs, and understanding the importance of charm versus clarity. These techniques are an effective way to influence and engage a user, either by streamlining the experience, which can help engage a user, or by influencing a user they can be taught important information without realising it. Hopefully this series has been useful for introducing the idea of affordance and visual clues into game development. Thank you for watching.